back to Stop.Sit.Surrogate with Kennedy and Ellen. We have a very wonderful guest today. We're going to let her introduce herself. So take it away.
Okay, hi. Thank you guys so much for having me on here. My name's Alex Cornsweet. I'm an intended parent. I have my second son was born via surrogacy, and I speak very openly about it on my Instagram page, Our Beautiful Surprise. And then I also, out of that, created a program called Embrace Your Motherhood, and I have a specific program that is for intended parents, and it's not just for moms; it's for both, if there's two intended parents. Just because I wished that I had something like that when I was going through it myself. And so that is something that I created after my journey. And I have like a little freebie download for everybody at the end. And I think it'll be in the show notes too, if that's possible. Yeah, perfect. But I'm very excited to talk to you guys and kind of share my story a little bit.
Oh
Or,
my gosh, I'm
or
excited. And I just have to say, I'm excited to finally talk to a West Coaster.
yeah. Yeah.
Alex, are both your children born through surrogacy?
So I have three boys. My story is, I mean, I think everybody's story is unique, especially with fertility treatments, but I will do like a little overview. My story could take way too long, so I won't take up everybody's time. But I'll just kind of jump in. My first son was born via IVF. So we had found out that I just had like physical issues. I think a lot of people going through infertility have a lot of undiagnosed issues. I had so many diagnosed issues. I just always had new issues coming up. And so my first one was a blocked fallopian tube. And then they told me that the other one was, they used the word compromised. And so they didn't feel like I could get pregnant in any other way besides IVF. And so I mean, honestly, that's something that I could talk forever about the fact that I didn't know my own anatomy as well as I should have.
I
I
think
just
that's a
think
lot
that
of
that's,
us.
yeah, like I didn't think about the fact that like, if the egg can't travel down the fallopian tube, then I'm not going to get pregnant. So that's where we were actually living in Boston at the time for my husband. And we got very lucky. We had insurance coverage for an entire round of IVF, which is very uncommon in the US. And so that's why we were able to jump right into IVF, like when we found that out. And so I know for a lot of people, the cost is very prohibitive, but we were lucky that we could jump into it right away. And so we got very lucky. Our first round of IVF worked, fresh transfer, had our first son. And so at that point, I didn't really consider myself in the infertility community just because it had gone as smoothly as it could have. And naively, I thought, oh, well, I can just have as many kids as I want now because I found the answer. And so we had frozen embryos, and I thought we just do a frozen embryo transfer next time. At that point, we moved to the West Coast, which is where we're both from. We moved back, and we found a new doctor, and we were realistic, like it might take a while. So when my son was like 9 months old, we went to a new doctor, and we decided that we would start trying again. And so it took a while. My body takes a really long time to get ready for transfers, which I think is another misconception about infertility in general. But I couldn't just do transfers every single month. Like I had a lot of things that I had to kind of do to prep my body. And so long story short, we basically spent the next 3 years trying transfers. We had canceled cycle. My body was not responding. It was like 5, 6 weeks on medication, no response. It was so frustrating, like thin lining, super thin lining, like basically like no lining. And so then they won't transfer, which I understand. But so we had canceled cycle. Then we finally did another transfer, and I had a miscarriage, which was honestly shocking to me because I don't know, naively, I thought if I do so much work to get pregnant, then I'm going to stay pregnant. And I think that's another thing about surrogacy that people don't really understand, that it doesn't always work every time, and that there can still be loss. But I think that's something that intended parents also, I didn't want to talk about that part of it beforehand, right? But even with IVF, like I thought, I'm already doing IVF. I have tested embryos. Like my body is getting prepped as well as it can. How can it not work? And so it did work, and then it didn't.
Okay.
And so when we'd had our first miscarriage, that was kind of, I don't know, that was the part that I think blindsided me a lot, because I thought like, well, okay, this might not actually work. Like, I think when it was canceled, I was upset, but I thought there was still a chance. And at that point we switched doctors, and then I ended up getting diagnosed with something called Asherman syndrome, which is like scarring in the uterus.
Ooh.
And he was like, oh, I can't even get in there. I was like, great. So, and my first loss was super early. It was like, they call it a chemical pregnancy, which I'm not a fan of, but, he was like, I've never seen anyone with this much scar tissue from a loss that early. And I was like, that's not something you needed to tell me because
Yeah.
it's still there.
Wow.
So I had to end up having like a surgery, and this is where like I was going through this and I had a child already. And so I felt guilty with that too. And so I remember spending his second birthday party with like a balloon in my uterus because I just had the surgery the day before. And it was just like a lot for those few years. And then we ended up having another failed transfer. And at that point, my doctor said, I think you should seriously start to look into surrogacy. And me and my husband were really shocked that that was his suggestion. We didn't really think that that was going to be, nobody thinks that, I mean,
Yeah.
there are certain people that think that's going to be their path. I was not someone that had any idea that that was going to be my path.
Sure. Yeah.
I thought that I would carry my own children. And so I think that's where I was really surprised when he suggested that. And so basically, me and my husband said, I want to try one more time with my body. Like, I have to know for sure that this isn't working, but it can take a long time to find an agency and find a match and all of that. So we'll start looking into it now. And I feel like there's a lot of resources now that I wish I knew about when I was going through it that I didn't know. And a lot of support, that's what led into my program. But so that's where so then I went to, I had a lot of prep again leading into the transfer. We found an agency. We kind of filled out the paperwork in preparation. We didn't pay any fees or anything to get started, but we just wanted to be able to pull the trigger if we had to.
Yeah.
And then we ended up having another transfer about 6 months after that. And then that was the fall of 2019. And everything was looking good. I got pregnant. I felt really like more confident. We were getting like higher betas. There was like something on the ultrasound, like we were starting to go. And then we had a missed miscarriage. And
Wow.
I remember being in the doctor's office, and my husband and I looked at each other and we're like, it's going to be really hard for people to understand this if they haven't been through anything like it. But we were like, okay, we got to sign up for surrogacy. Like, it was, and the doctor was like, how about you take time and go grieve? And I was like, I don't have time to grieve. Like it just felt like that. We're like, we've been trying for years to have a second child. Our first child's getting older, and we don't want to be doing this anymore. And we knew it could take a while to match. So we thought, you know what, we'll just sign up for the agency. It can take a while to match, and then we'll grieve while we wait.
Yeah.
And so we ended up matching with our surrogate, Madison, and she's wonderful. We're still very close with her. And I think it's interesting, like, I think this was before we actually started Kennedy, but like you were talking about just the communication being so important, right, with the intended parents and the surrogates. And I feel like one thing that's not really encouraged all the time is to start that communication before you actually start working together. And I think that people get nervous about that on both ends because you don't want to jinx it. You don't want something to fall through. You don't want to get attached on either end.
Right.
But then what if there's really big things that you disagree on? That's a problem, right? So I think that we ended up matching really well, but I think we both wish there were certain things that we had been able to talk about a little bit more before she even got pregnant.
Yeah.
And so she ended up having my doctor required a mock transfer cycle because she had never been a surrogate before.
Mhm.
And
That's common
then,
now.
yeah, I think it is common. I think it makes
Mhm.
the intended parents feel better too,
Mhm.
just to know all the meds are on the right day and all of that. And then she had a transfer that failed. And at that point, we were like, I mean, the thing is, you go into it with that warning and you know it's possible. But as an intended parent, you think, if this person who has this perfect body for getting pregnant, she has 2 children, she's never had any issue, and she's thinking the same thing. So it's like, we're
Right.
thinking, how are we ever going to have a child if she can't even get pregnant? And she's thinking, I'm failing because I can't give this. And that's what she said afterwards, like, which is not how we felt. And I told her I never felt that way about her, but she felt that way as the surrogate.
Yeah.
And so that's where, like, I think we started talking a little bit more about that after the fact. But then we both decided that we would go move forward with another transfer. And because her body responded really well, that didn't take very long to get to the other transfer. However, it was March 2020. So
Ah, yeah. When you said
um,
2019, I
I
was like,
know,
oh,
you know
brother,
what's
here we
coming.
go.
Yeah. So her transfer, what she started meds the week that the country shut down.
Oh my God.
And we were told, I remember getting a call um from our doctor's office saying, we're going to cancel her cycle for now. We're just going to hold off because of the pandemic. And I said, are you canceling all of your patients? And she's like, oh no, just the surrogates. And I said, okay, well, so if I could get pregnant, you wouldn't cancel my cycle. And she said, well, yeah, I mean, no, I guess that's right. And I was like, well, that's kind of discriminatory, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like, not allowing her. And I said, also, she's not a new patient of yours. You've done a transfer cycle with her before. And it's not really fair to say that I can't do a transfer because I can't get pregnant. And they didn't even want to touch that. So they're like, yep, okay, that's fine. She can do the
Good
Good.
for
transfer.
Good for
you.
you.
Like,
Good
well,
for
I was
you.
like, I'm not, we've already been waiting. And also,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
her husband is in the Marines. They didn't know how long he was going to be here for. I was like, I don't want,
Oh, yeah.
they were
Right.
already like a year into their stay, and some of their stays were only 2 years in places. So I was like,
Right.
she might not even be in our state in another
Delivering.
6 months, a
Right.
year, you know? So I'm like, we
Right.
can't wait. I don't want to start this whole matching process over.
Right.
And she didn't want to. And the thing is, for her, she wanted to kind of be able to move on with her life after also. So she didn't want to wait. And I
Yeah.
didn't want her to move on to a different intended parent that, so all these feelings.
Yeah.
So we decided to, luckily they did it, and she got pregnant, and that was our son, our second son.
Aw.
But the whole experience of surrogacy also during a pandemic was very different,
Bet.
because I couldn't be at the transfer. She couldn't have, so it's like both sides, right? I couldn't be at the transfer, but she also had to be at it alone. So
Yep.
that's hard. It was
Aw.
like her second transfer, but I was at her first, but still. And I remember the agency saying, you need to FaceTime them during the whole thing. And I said, if that's too stressful, just take a video, like, or to have someone else in the room take a video of just the
Yeah.
screen.
Yeah.
Like, and she was like, oh my God, thank you for letting me do that. And I was like,
Aw.
letting you, you're about to get
Aw.
pregnant with my child. Like,
Yeah.
and so just the pressure, that kind of miscommunication of,
Yeah.
the agency was telling her one thing, and then we're like, no, that's not actually how we feel about it though. And luckily she spoke, or I was on the call with that or something, where we both kind of spoke up about it, because
Oh,
I was like,
good.
I don't want to add more stress to the transfer for her. And like, I don't even think I took a video of the transfer of our first son, but I was there. So that's why.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so but like now I probably would, but I just didn't know. But then, so she was so great though, because I couldn't go, neither my husband or I could go to any appointments. And also for her, she couldn't have anyone with her at her appointments,
Right.
including her husband, right? So she was felt alone in it. We felt kind of isolated from it. And so I would meet her outside of the doctor's office just to say hi, kind of at a distance. And then she would like give me the photos of the, like, whatever she had from that day. And that was like kind of our interactions the whole time in person. But I think because we weren't allowed to see each other in person very much, we ended up communicating a lot more by text.
Sure.
And like, she has 2 kids. I had a son, like I had one child at that point. So it's just easier to text, and we both kind of agreed on that versus like the calls. And so it was good. Like I think all of it though, the whole experience, like it went well. There were definitely some ups and downs for both of us where there was a miscommunication on one side or the other. And I think like what you guys said before this, like with the communication, both the intended parents and the surrogates don't want to rock the boat. So then both people are afraid of saying things. And it's interesting because like as intended parents, you don't know that the surrogate feels like that during the, right? And I don't think the surrogates assume, I don't know, you don't know both ways necessarily, right?
Yeah.
And so, and like for us, like as intended parents, we're told by everyone, like, just be grateful for it. You should just be like praising this person all the time, like never
God.
complain about it.
Wow.
You
So,
know,
like,
Alex,
Wow.
we're kind of told the same thing though. Like,
Really?
be grateful for it. Don't complain. Don't rock the boat. Don't have, like, don't say
That's so
anything.
crazy. I didn't know that surrogates
Yeah.
were told that
Yeah.
too. Like we were told by our therapist because we were given the same one as our surrogate, and she didn't really love her either. That we all we had, like, she didn't really give us any actually support for ourselves. It was more like, what have you done today for Madison? Like, have you checked in on her enough? Have you done this? And I'm like, of
Really?
course we have. Of
Oh.
course we're checking in on her.
Right.
But the thing is, I understand that they need to have that in place because not all intended parents are thinking enough about what the surrogate is going through, and not, I think it can go both ways.
Yeah.
But for me, I think like Madison said that she really appreciated the fact that I had a child already. Like it made it easier for her because she thought that and she said obviously either way, but she said because of that, she knew I could understand what pregnancy felt like. She knew that I could understand what, like how overwhelming it is to give birth, just all of that, where I understand. Because she said like, oh, is it okay? Like some of the conversations that the agency would have would like, oh, you know, do you have any dietary things? And I'm like, why would I tell her what to eat? I don't know.
Right.
It was just kind of like, if she just wants to eat bread for 6 months because she doesn't feel good, then I don't really care. And I don't know. I found it really crazy to me that people would tell someone else what to eat. But I know that happens. I'm sure that
Same.
happens. And so I think, but even things like that, I think at first we were communicating through another person. And then eventually we realized that we just needed to directly tell each other things because there
Yes.
was a lot lost in translation.
Yes.
And a lot of kind of blaming the other person. And I don't think it was on purpose, but like where the miscommunication ended up being, oh, well, Alex doesn't want this. No, that's not what Alex said, you know? So like even for the birth, like there was miscommunication because it was very in COVID, right? So
Yeah.
we were nervous about being able to be at the birth. And we were at a very surrogacy friendly hospital on purpose. Also, my brother-in-law is a pediatrician that rounds at that hospital. So he was like,
Oh.
these are the nurses to talk to make
Nice.
sure. So that helped us a lot.
Yeah.
And we told him, actually saw him this weekend, like, you helped that situation a lot. And so during it though, like they allowed, at first they were like, only one person's going to be in the delivery room. And I was like, well, that would mean just her husband's in there, right? Like one of us, I mean, eventually we need to take our baby. So
Right,
let's
yeah.
see. And so then they said, well, we'll let 2 people in the delivery room and we'll have to see about a 3rd person. And how I said it was, I would really be upset if my husband can't be at the birth of his own child,
Yeah.
because I was going to be the default person just from what my husband and I talked about. And I was closer to Madison from talking to her more. And she felt more comfortable with me in the room more of the time because also I'm a woman and
Totally.
we wanted to be respectful of her privacy with everything. So, but the way it got communicated to her was that if there's only 2 people allowed, it would only be me and my husband, and she wouldn't be allowed to have a support person. And we were like, no, we would never tell you that you can't have your own husband there to support you, you know? So there was
Yeah.
just like a lot of that miscommunication. And I remember her being really honest with me about like how upset she was about it. And I was like, I'm so
Aw.
sorry. That's not even what I intended. Like, that's not how I wanted to make you feel, because
Oh,
obviously we want you to have a support person. So
Was
yeah,
that communication through the hospital or through the agency?
the
agency.
agency. I
Hmm.
think that the agency is
Wow.
very important for, and it's hard though, because there's quite a few of them, but there's also, at the time for me, it felt like there were not a lot of options. I don't know.
Yeah.
It just, there are a lot of options. And I think that that's one thing I definitely
Yeah.
recommend doing research. I think part of
Yeah.
the problem as an intended parent and surrogate to do research on both ends.
Yeah.
But
Good.
I think as an intended parent, you just feel like you're in this race to get a baby. Like you don't
Oh,
want to stop. Like I didn't want to stop and take any time to do anything.
Yeah.
And so we did though. I mean, we did research, but you just never know what it's going to be like. There's so many questions that
Mhm.
you don't really know what else there's going to be. So I created my program after I had been an intended parent, right? And after
yeah.
I had seen what it was like to be an intended parent, and after I became a mom again, like it was my second child. But
Yeah.
so, but I think motherhood kind of feels different every time you become a mom again. Like it's a new experience with two than it was with one. And
Yeah.
so basically my program focuses on supporting intended parents after the baby is born,
Mm.
because there's a little bit of support, and now more agencies are adding support before a little bit. But I had no support after. And so I felt, and I didn't really have support during, but so basically I to have one or two calls with the intended parents during like when the baby is due, like before the baby's due. And that's to kind of figure out how the program's going to work with them, you know, like details on that, because I want to make sure it's customized to them and they feel comfortable with it moving forward. But the essentially it's they get 12 sessions, and I would go more into detail of like what everything, you know, is with them directly, because it's just so personal. But a big topics that we focus on are acceptance of your path to motherhood or parenthood in general, and finding more joy, because as much as I find joy and always have in motherhood, like the anxiety was so much more than I expected. And I actually ended up getting diagnosed with postpartum anxiety after my son was born, when I
Oh,
didn't even carry him. And
oh,
so I didn't know that you could have anxiety at that level if you didn't carry a child. And I think
huh.
they said it's either postpartum or generalized anxiety, but it was directly related to having a new baby.
Yeah.
And and men, I think men can have anxiety as new parents too, and depression.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that there's this misconception that you have to be the birthing parent to have those feelings, because people think of them being attached to hormones or something, but it's not just that, right?
Mm-mm.
And for me, it was that I really never dealt with the grief and the loss of my
Mm.
whole path to motherhood.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, I was still really angry that I couldn't carry him.
Yeah.
And then I felt really guilty about feeling angry because I had him. So I was like, why
Oh.
do I even care how he was brought into this world? Because he's here, right? But I
Mhm.
still had this kind of, it wasn't what I pictured happening. And we got thrown into everything, and I just kind of put my head down and move forward. So I think with that, my goal for intended parents is to help them be able to work through the traumas that they've experienced throughout their path,
Yeah.
and also talk about triggers and talk about different things that are still very much a part of things, and accept really who they are as a parent without any shame towards other feelings that aren't necessarily just joy or just positive things. So I feel like just encouraging them to embrace kind of all of themselves and all of their feelings, and also to help them start to build connections with other people and find a tribe of people, because
Mhm.
I think when you have a different path to parenthood, you don't really feel like you fit in anywhere anymore. Like
Yeah.
I didn't really fit in the infertility community. I didn't really fit in with other moms. That was my perception.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's kind of finding out that that's not true. And there are ways to find a tribe still of people that will support you and understand you, and kind of navigating, do you want to continue to talk about your path to parenthood? How much are you going to talk about it? And also talking to independent parents about like, what are you going to talk to your child about? Like, are you comfortable with it? Or like, how is this going to go? Because that's something a lot of people don't really give enough thought to as well. I think they think I'll just figure it out. I know for us, I talk about surrogacy every day. So my son definitely knows that word, and it's positive and happy and love, you know. And
Alex, who is Madison to him?
so she actually moved across the country, so we don't see her in person a ton. But she has met him afterwards, like a few times. And I talk about her. So we kind of call her more like a family friend because that's more what she became.
Yeah.
I say she's my friend because she is now.
Yeah.
I didn't know her before, but she's definitely my friend now. But so he's only 3. And
Okay.
so he doesn't really fully grasp, I think,
Sure.
right? But
Right.
we talk about it a little bit. But my oldest is 7. And
Okay.
so my 7-year-old though is understanding a lot more. So he was the one born via IVF. And then when my second son was born via surrogacy, when he was 4 months old, I found out I was pregnant.
you
Isn't that funny how things work?
Oh my
Like
gosh.
spontaneous pregnancy, you know, like just
Wow. All that
good
stress
old
and
fashioned.
anxiety just went, ooh.
It's just like, it's
Oh my
crazy
gosh.
because I will always say like, there's absolutely no reason it happened other than I just got extremely lucky because I don't know, I will never be able to describe it. But I think also because I had recurrent loss,
Yeah.
I I sound kind of ridiculous when I tell the story about how I found out because I literally did not even consider the fact that I was pregnant. Like I thought, like
that's
there was no
fair.
way. I was
Right.
told I was never going to get pregnant on my own.
Right.
Right.
IVF didn't even work. So I was
Yeah.
like, if IVF only worked once and it didn't work 6 or 7 other times,
Gosh.
there's no way that I would be pregnant without IVF. And
Right.
so, and I have like a 4-month-old at home and I'm stressed out and I'm anxious
my
about
Oh my
that, you know.
gosh.
So like I'm just anxious about everything that's happened to us and whatever.
Oh.
So I just remember like I didn't feel very good. And I was like, oh, there's something else wrong with my body because I just had so many surgeries that I just assumed that it was a negative thing. And I remember I went to a fertility clinic that I had gone to like a year prior, and or like 2 years prior, but I trusted them. It wasn't one that I actually ever did a cycle with, but I just really trusted them. And they were also a fertility clinic that I absolutely love because she's very understanding. Like, I wasn't going to be doing a cycle with them. I just needed some blood work. I needed to find out what was going on with my body. And she was like, yeah, come in. Like, we'll figure out what's going on. You know, because a lot of doctors won't take you if you're not doing a full cycle with them. At least from my experience. But I went in, she was like, look, we're gonna do like baseline, like figure out what's going on. And then we got a call that night and she was like, oh, congratulations, you're pregnant. And
Oh my
I
gosh.
remember sitting on the couch with my husband. Our kids had just gone to sleep. I mean,
Oh
our
my
4-month-old
God.
was like off and on,
Great.
right? But like they were both sleeping. We literally had just sat down on the couch with like a glass of wine. My husband like reaches over and pours mine into his. It's just like
Oh, so
instinctively.
cute.
Oh, how
And then he's like, did
Cute.
I just hear that correctly? And I was like, are you calling the right person? Like we
Oh.
were like, are you calling like for a beta test? Like, did you call the right person? And so we ended up finding out super early on because I like didn't really wait to find out when I felt like something was wrong with my body at that point.
Yeah.
And so luckily, I just feel like who knows why everything worked out. I think it made a difference that I found out early. Like I wasn't even 5 weeks pregnant when we found out.
Wow.
And
Oh,
then,
that's
so it was like
great.
as early as I could have. My beta test was like 30. It was like just pregnant.
Wow.
Like if you pee on a stick, it has to be like a beta of 25.
Yeah.
And so I was like, which I only know from IVF, but like,
But now I
but
know,
like,
so thanks.
yeah. That's why like it
Sensitive
can
one.
show up as negative when you start to get your numbers.
Right.
But like, so I was like very early pregnancy. And so the low beta number scared me at first, but she's like, I think you're probably just really early. And also my cycles were pretty irregular. However, right after he was born, I started getting a cycle every month, which was very unusual for me. Or like
Oh.
not every month, but it was still like 40 days, not, but I was so irregular. It was the first time in my whole life I was getting any sort of regular periods, or seemingly like kind of regular, which is probably why it happened, because I was ovulating, which I didn't know, because I was
Mhm.
like, oh, I probably won't, I'll get one period and then like won't for like 6 months. Like that was normal for me. So I just didn't even consider it. But like then when but because I found out so early, I was able to then go in and get more blood work done, and my progesterone was already taking a nosedive, which is probably part of the reason I had losses. Um, and then also like she just said, she called it the kitchen sink. She's like, I'm just gonna throw everything at you. Like, we're gonna put you on blood thinners twice a day. We're gonna put you on progesterone, estrogen. Like, we're gonna monitor you. So she had me monitoring twice a week for the first 14 weeks, like up till 14 weeks pregnant. Just because also my progesterone kept going down. Like it kept,
Even while you were getting progesterone,
they
like
kept having to up it. Like they kept, and
wow.
that's why I was like, I don't think I would be pregnant right now if I wasn't
Right.
going to the doctor all the
Right.
time.
Because you can't stay pregnant if the progesterone doesn't, if it
Right.
has to
And
sustain
so
a
it kept
pregnancy.
going down. They raised my levels, and then they ended up adding a progesterone and oil shot as well, because it was just like not, it just was not staying stable. And
Yeah.
so that's why I was getting blood work done like twice a week. And I was like, oh, here we go again. Because, but I was then pregnant. So I was happy to go. Like,
Right.
if
Yeah.
that was going to happen. And then one of my losses, I had bled. I had lost the baby at like 5 weeks. And so I actually started bleeding again with him at like 5 weeks. And at that point, we've moved since then, but we were living in the same house. It was the same bathroom that I had to like.
Oh
So I
gosh.
was like, it's ending. Like, this is going to be the end. And my husband and I were both like, the
Oh,
kind of conversations that you have to have when you've been through that is insane. We're like,
Oh,
I guess if
sad.
it's happening now, it's better than if it's, you know, that kind of insane
Oh,
thing where it's like,
gosh.
at least I don't
Right.
have to, you know, like those are the kind of things that actually went through our mind at that point. And
Wow.
now I look at my son and I'm like, oh, I can't believe you actually made it.
Oh, so sweet.
Like, but like she handled it. Like when we had that loss, we were at a different doctor, and they literally were like, if you're gonna have a miscarriage, you're gonna have a miscarriage. We can't do anything about it. Like they were so rude when I actually had the loss. And then, or my first one. But then for this
That's what
one,
they wait, that's what they said for at your first one?
yeah, when
Just
I
like
had my
brushed
first
you to the
loss
side?
in 2018, I called and said, I'm bleeding and I'm nervous. And they're like, well, if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen, and we can't fit you in. So,
Dear God.
Could you
and
be
I was
more
like,
cold-hearted?
I never went back. They never took me back to the doctor. They had me do one more beta to confirm it was going down. This was in 2018. And then
Wow.
they were like, oh, by the way, you're right. You are having a miscarriage, and it's okay. We can just do another round.
What?
So I moved on from that doctor
I'm
after
Insensitive.
that.
sorry. That's
Yeah,
insanely insensitive. I'm
it was
sorry that you
horrible.
experienced that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That was
that
actually like the
sucks.
tip of the iceberg for that doctor. Like it was the worst experience ever. That
God.
was
Wow.
2018. I was like, you made 2018 the worst year. And then also I had this great year at home because I had a kid that was one. But it was like, you know, very
Wow.
different lives happening at the same time.
Yeah.
The thing that's horrible about that is that I found there's so many good doctors that
Mhm.
then when you find that bad one, it makes the whole industry look bad too.
Agreed.
And it's just sad. Then the good, when I was pregnant in 2021, and then staying pregnant finally, that's where that doctor, when I started bleeding, I called the doctor's office at like 10 o'clock at night, and it was so triggering because it was like the same time period.
Oh,
It was like the
Oh,
same time period, same time
everything.
of day, same
gosh.
room, same everything.
Yeah.
And I remember just losing it like immediately when I saw any blood. And
Yeah.
then I called the doctor's office. The doctor herself called me back like 10 minutes later, and she was like, Alex, I know you're not going to believe me right now, but this can be different. You're going to stay pregnant. Nothing is going to happen. And tomorrow at 6 a.m. when we open, you're going to come in and I'm going to show you that the baby's still okay.
Oh my
And I was
so
gosh.
like, that's what I
sweet.
needed to hear.
Yeah.
And then the next day I saw the heartbeat for the first time.
Oh, goosebumps.
And
Ah.
I was like, he's okay. I didn't know it was a
Oh,
boy, but like I just, yeah, it was. And I thought, okay, like
what
just to
a
also have that doctor behind me that time, I was like,
Mhm.
being pregnant after all the loss and everything felt really difficult. And so to have a doctor who was so empathetic was
Yeah.
just so incredibly important to me at that moment. Like I just needed that doctor and I needed her to say that. And then also the nurse practitioner who's actually a sister-in-law, my like she's like a family member. And so she was the one I saw a lot too, and she was super empathetic. And it was like funny because she knew all this stuff and she's like, obviously I can't tell the family, like I would never, right? Like I was like, oh, don't tell anyone. She's like, I mean, I can't legally tell anyone, but
Right.
like
Yeah.
I also won't. And I remember saying to her, like, I think it's gonna be a boy again. Because we had two boys. And
Yeah.
she was like, well, there's a 50-50 chance. And I was like, I don't think so. Like our embryos, we had
I was gonna ask.
yeah, so like we had so with our first son, we hadn't tested our embryos.
No.
But with our because we were doing surrogacy and also because I was having losses, we tested the embryos. So I had done 2 retrievals. Again, kind of a long story. The first one I had embryos from, but we did a second retrieval because I had gotten pregnant with a fresh transfer, so they wanted to kind of try that again.
Okay.
This was the bad doctor though. So
Oh.
and he overstimulated, like I was on stims for 21 days. Which is
Oh my
way too long.
gosh, that's a
So I
long
felt like my body
time.
was going to explode out of itself.
Wow. Whoa.
And the
How
first
many,
time I was on stims for 11 days, like, and then
how
had the,
many how many eggs were retrieved after that
so
long stint?
actually I had less like viable eggs from that. I think because he just
He
overstimulated. He
overdid
was,
it.
yeah. I mean, that is something I am fortunate and I feel very lucky for. Eggs were never my problem. Like
Mhm.
my first round of IVF embryos, we got 15 embryos that made it to day
Wow.
5.
Wow.
And
That's
then the
great.
second round we got 9. And then
Great.
we had been in Boston, we shipped our embryos. So we had 15 embryos. We used one, our son, our first son. And they just did that. He wasn't PGT tested. They called it PGS at the time, but PGT tested. But he was like really highly ranked, like a 5AA embryo. So that's why they used him. And he worked and he's here.
Oh.
And then when we did the second embryo transfer, they actually thawed the first like 14 remaining embryos and tested all of the embryos that we
Oh,
had. So we had 23 embryos that we tested,
wow.
which I know is like such a high number for people. And I don't want to be like, that's the
No,
one thing my body was doing right.
good for
Or
you.
like that
That's
was
That's
good.
great.
amazing though.
And so with the 23 and with me and my husband, and so with the 23 embryos tested, I think we had, it's bad because I should remember the number, but we had a lot of like canceled, losses and stuff in between. But I think we had 15 that were healthy, like PG
Wow,
tested.
that's
So,
Wow.
great.
but what was crazy is like out of the 23 that were tested, plus like we knew the 24th was my son, right? My first son.
Right.
So out of 24 embryos total that were the beginning stages, 12 were girls and 12 were boys.
Oh,
But the healthy ones, we had, I think, 11 boys and 4 girls. So we
oh,
just pretty much had boys. And
boys.
then we had transferred 1 girl for me, 2 girls for 2 of my transfers, which was one of my failed transfers and one of my miscarriages. And then one of my miscarriages was a boy. It's really weird to know that too.
Yeah,
Um,
that is weird
and
too.
then, yeah, it just kind of makes it, I don't know if it makes it harder because it's hard anyway, but then like you really have an attachment because you know what
Right.
gender they were.
Right.
And then our first transfer with our surrogate was a girl, and that was the one that was the failed transfer. And
Okay.
then I think that was another level of grieving because while I was genuinely happy with either gender and I just wanted to have a healthy baby, that was kind of the end of like, we're definitely not going to have a girl.
Okay.
Because the rest of the embryos that were healthy, I think at that point we had 10 embryos left. They said, I would use all of your boys before we got to any of the other girls that are remaining. Like all of the healthy ones were, and the highly, 5A,
Yeah.
whatever rating
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
boys. And
Okay.
so they were like, you have we feel like your odds are a lot higher. And obviously we're like, just do whatever you believe is the right
Exactly.
choice.
Yeah.
And
Aw.
I think I mean, I will be honest, I think this is something people don't necessarily like to admit or like to hear, but we did choose to have a girl transferred the first time with our surrogate because she had 2 daughters. Like we also had a boy, and like I said, I will justify it to the end of the days saying I didn't care, but that's what we ended up doing. And then when we had the talk with the embryologist after that, and he said, all of your boys are higher rated, even though they're all technically tested. We were like, you just choose. Like, I don't want to have a say in it anymore. And then we had our second son. And then, so then when I was pregnant with my third son, which was a boy, I was like, look, 90% of our healthy embryos are boys. We definitely, if I'm still pregnant, it's a boy. Like it's definitely a boy. And so we were too curious. So we found out, that blood test that they can do. And when we found out it was a boy, I was like, I knew it was a boy. Like I knew we were having another boy.
But how cool. They're all brothers and very cool.
Yeah. Well, and then like, it's very interesting after the fact now, because obviously you can't tell spouse, and this is a big thing that I talk to my intended parents about. Like, you have no idea how someone became a parent by looking at them. Like, you, like, if you choose to not, I like tell everyone I meet that I did surrogacy, but like, if you choose not to be like me and be as open, which is totally valid, no one will ever know. And like, for me, I felt like I want to talk about it because one, I want to honor what Madison did for us. Like, I feel like I always want to honor that she is the one that brought him into this world, but also the fact that it's just not shameful. And it's something that I want my son to grow up knowing how incredibly wanted and loved he was. And that's how I talk about it with our family. It's like, I wanted, like, each of them were born in their own unique ways, which also makes the conversation actually kind of easier for me because they were each born in different ways. Yeah. And it's kind of like, okay, look, I wanted all of you. I just needed to go about it in a different way for each of you. But none of them are better than the other. And that's where, when you had asked kind of what my son thinks about surrogacy or what he thinks about Madison, since he's only 3, he doesn't really understand it yet, but my 7-year-old has met her a couple times and remembers her. And we were talking kind of recently, and he was like, so I was in your belly, like all of us were in your belly. And I was like, nope, no, all of you were not in my belly. And he's like, what? Like, I don't understand. And so I said, well, you've seen pictures. I said, he had seen pictures. I said, you were in my belly, like you grew in my belly. I said, you know that your littlest brother grew in my belly because you saw me pregnant. You were old enough to like remember me being pregnant. I said, but your middle brother, I did not. I said, I was not able to have him in my belly. And he said, well, did daddy have him in his belly? Because he doesn't like understand. He's 7.
So cute.
And I was like, that's a really good question, but that's not possible right now. It'd be surprising if that's ever possible. But I said, daddy actually doesn't have the organ that he would need to carry a baby. I said he probably would have loved to be able to do that when I couldn't, but I said he just doesn't have that organ. And he's like, well, then where was he before he came home? And I said, well, you remember Madison? And I said, she actually had him in her belly for us. And while this doesn't matter, the biological connection, I did say, like, he is fully biologically related to you. He is your brother, but we just needed extra help to get him to the point where we could bring him home. And he was like, oh, why? And I said, well, my body just, I said, because it's confusing because I carried the 1 and 3. Right. But I was like, it would have been less confusing if I didn't carry, 2 or 2. But I was like, the fact that I only didn't carry the middle one was like trying to explain that to him. Yeah. And I was like, you know what? My body just wasn't wanting to carry a baby at that point. And he's like, oh, and it's just like, I have a lot of conversations with him and he's very thoughtful. And he's like, oh, kind of like how you said there's some people that even though they really want a baby more than anything in the whole world, they still can't have one. And I said, yep, exactly like that. And I like almost started to cry when he said that. And I was like, that's exactly what it's like. And he's like, so your tummy was kind of sick? And I was like, yeah, that's kind of what was happening. And he's like, oh, and then he was like, oh, mommy, that's just so wonderful. Because now you have your 3 boys. How great is that? You're so lucky. And I was like, I literally wish everyone responded that
Yeah,
So
seriously,
it's
kids,
just like,
Ah, out of the mouths of
kids
babes.
yeah.
are
Yeah.
the best. They understand way more than grouchy adults.
It's
Like
Well,
just
and
not
they're also,
complicated for them.
right.
It's this and this. Okay, got it.
point
Yeah.
A to
Yeah.
point B.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just
Oh, what
really
a
sweet because I thought,
sweetie.
okay, like you can understand that. And so I've had the conversation with him. My other kids were right there when we had the conversation. They just didn't understand it or care about what we were talking about yet. But I think for me, it's like, that's why I always intended and will always speak openly about it and talk to them about it. But that's, I think, why, like, as part of what I talk to intended parents about and kind of help them through is how to navigate that part of it, because I think that can be kind of overwhelming for people also. But also just kind of like in general, how to navigate talking about it in overall. Like if you want to be open with your friends or strangers, like I am, or anybody about surrogacy, because people react, it's kind of difficult. Sometimes people react not positively. And I'm sure you have
Oh, yeah.
experienced that.
Yeah.
And it's not even that, like when I was having him, I would be at the park with my, at that point, only child. And they'd say, "Oh, is he your only son?" Which always really annoyed me when I was trying to have another one and wasn't. Which I think people need to stop talking about, like asking people that question, because there's also
Right.
nothing wrong with one child and not everybody has a choice. Kind of like stop asking people when they're gonna have kids.
Yes.
Yeah. Agreed.
But like I would be asked, "Oh, is he your only son?" And so at the point where I was actually having another child, I said, "Oh, well, actually, we're expecting another child." And when she was only like 3 months along, it was not that confusing to people because I could, and so I kind of didn't always explain to like a random stranger that I would see for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But when she was like 8 months pregnant, they're like, "Oh, he's due next week." And they're like, "But
But wait, yeah.
you don't look pregnant."
You
And I
hold
was
it
like,
very well.
yeah. And I was
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, there's no baby in there." I said, "Actually, someone else is carrying our child for us, like through surrogacy." And I always said, like, I wasn't able to carry him. Like it isn't that I didn't want to, right?
Right.
And it all of a sudden, every single time would shift from, "Oh, congratulations, that's so wonderful," to, "Oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me more about that?" Like not, it was always just curiosity, explain to me the details of it. And I was like, I don't always like, and it got to the point where like I wanted to tell people, but then I almost stopped telling people when it was like a random 5-minute interaction or
For
less,
sure.
because
Yeah.
I didn't want to educate every single person that I came in contact with at the park. Like I might just want to be there with my son. So I
Right.
think that's where like, that's another thing of helping navigate people just when their child is with them, like parenting and building that tribe of people where you feel comfortable being honest about your experiences, but also kind of navigating just what that's going to look like to you. Because I think everybody's experience and what everybody feels comfortable with is very different.
Yeah.
And yeah, so my kids are now 2, 3, and 7.
Oh,
But that's another like a part of the
Yeah.
reason that surrogacy also not that it comes up, but that I offer it in conversation in daily life is because they're only 12 and a half months apart.
Yeah.
So people, the comments are
Oh, I bet.
always like, "Oh, are they?" Well, first of all, they always think they're twins, which I totally understand because they look like they could be twins.
Oh.
And they're very similar in size now that they're 2 and 3. And so I feel like, and they just look so much alike, like from the back, they look so much alike. So I totally get that they look like twins, but I always correct people and they say, "Oh, are they twins?" And I say, "Oh, they're about a year apart." And they're either like, it's really funny what people feel comfortable with saying.
Yeah.
Like, "Oh, you know how that happens, right? Like, oh, you just decided to skip the movie that night." Like all these
Wow.
like
Wow, people
comments.
ballsy.
God.
And then, so yeah, sometimes I'll laugh and walk away and make it like not a big deal. And then other times though, I'll be honest and I'll say like, "Oh no, I actually didn't give birth to this one." And people are always like, first of all, they want to obviously know more information.
Yeah.
And I explain it and it's always like a happy, positive, like, and I say like, I just wasn't able to, and we had another woman like carried him for us, surrogacy. And I kind of try to explain. And it's really interesting. And I'm curious, I think you probably get this also as like with both of you having experienced being surrogates, but people tend to get really uncomfortable when I talk about it, like publicly. Not always. They're either curious
Yeah.
or they get uncomfortable, like, oh, I'm sorry. And maybe it's because I'm the one that didn't carry, so they almost feel like
Okay.
it's like a sad thing.
Sure.
But I'm like, no, I mean, he's here. I'm okay. Like
Yeah.
it was a positive experience, you know?
Yeah.
And I just find that like a lot of people get really awkward because it's not commonly spoken about. So
No.
people get really uncomfortable. Like they wish that I had just said that they were twins.
Right.
So, and
Oh,
I'm like,
funny.
but for me, I'm like, I'm not going to lie to make you uncomfortable, to make you comfortable. Like if you're
Right.
uncomfortable with it, then maybe you won't, we'll stop making these assumptions about people. And
Yeah.
I'm like, that's just my personality. Like,
Same.
I don't really care if I make you uncomfortable because I'm just telling you the truth and it's not a negative thing.
Right.
So like I recently was in a Nordstrom with my all three, actually, I had all three of them with me. They were being very good. But we were getting like a holiday gift for someone. And, you know, the two were in the stroller. They look like twins. Some random stranger was like, oh, are they twins? They're so cute. And I said, oh, they're a year apart. And this is probably the weirdest question I've ever been asked. She's like, oh, but you gave birth to both of them. Like the way she said it wasn't like, it was like the weirdest way I've ever heard someone say it.
Interesting.
I was like, actually, no.
Oh,
And she was like, wait, what? No, but you gave birth to both of them. And I was like, actually, I did not give birth to both of them. And then she really started to kind of piss me off because she was like, oh, but they're really brothers though, right? And I was like, first of all, if one was adopted, they would still really be brothers. But
thank
like,
you.
True.
like, and if both of them were, or if one of, you know, they didn't
Yeah.
have to be genetically related to be really brothers. So
Correct.
the ink that really pissed me off. But I was like, yes, they are really brothers. I said, you know, I said we had to do surrogacy for like, and I pointed to my middle son, and I said, because you know, I said, it's kind of a long story because obviously this woman was not going to sit and listen to my story and I didn't need to tell her it. But I was like, he was surrogacy. I did give birth to him and I gave birth to him. And she was like, oh, okay. And she literally walked away, like in the middle of this conversation, like because I made her
Wow.
uncomfortable, she just
Weird.
left.
She's the one who initiated the conversation by asking
Yeah.
if they were twins.
I kind
so-
of wonder what she was expecting as your response to be when she was like,
Yeah.
so you gave birth to both of them. And it's like, well, what did you want her response to be?
I mean, most people, I think she just didn't, I think the thing is she didn't even consider the fact that like she wasn't thinking the fact that not everybody gives birth to their children, right? She
Right.
wasn't
Yes.
like surrogacy is definitely not people's first thought ever.
No.
But also adoption, like,
Mhm.
you know, but apparently
Wild.
she just really was misinformed and I was perfectly happy to make her uncomfortable.
Oh, good for you.
But like the fact that she just walked away, and then we also get the comments a lot because I have the three boys. They ask if I'm going to try for the girl all the time because I think because they're also young. But still, I think that's just pretty common. It's so annoying.
It's rude to ask. It's
Right. But I'm like, I don't usually go into detail with that one. I usually just say no. But it's like, I couldn't if I like, it's a miracle I have all three of these boys. Okay.
Yeah.
So like,
Right.
no.
Yeah.
And like some of our losses were girls, which I don't go into with strangers, but it's like, you just never know what people have gone through. So it's just really
Yeah.
rude to say that.
It
But
is.
so we get asked it so often that, oh, are you going to try for that girl? Oh, you only have boys, like comments like that to my children, like they're standing right there. And my 7-year-old the other day was like, we walked away because I said, no, I'm very happy with my boys. I don't, you know, this is
These
it.
people.
And as we were walking away, my oldest was like, that was so rude.
Good for him.
I
Good for
agree.
him.
And he's like, how dare they say that? We are great. Like you are perfectly happy with us. We're great.
I love that.
I was like, yes, you are.
Beauty.
So it's just funny because it's like, the fact that people ask these certain questions or make these comments, and this is why I also talk about
Crazy.
surrogacy in front of my kids, because people make these comments or act all awkward or walk away and make it this shameful thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's
No.
not shameful. And
Mm-mm.
I want my kids, I don't want these strangers' interactions to be the thing that they think is normal, right? Like,
Right.
Right.
and it unfortunately does get normal sometimes, but I'm like, just because a lot of people are doing this doesn't mean that that's the right way to react to someone. And it
Right.
doesn't mean that that's like how I feel or what the truth is, you know?
Right.
Like the truth is that I'm happy you're here. All of it's beautiful. Like
Yeah.
surrogacy is just full of love. And the people who don't understand that have a completely wrong, like misconception and definition of what
And
surrogacy is. And like for
uninformed.
me, I talk
Uninformed.
about it. Yeah, like I talk about it a lot on Instagram too, surrogacy. And like whenever I post about surrogacy on Instagram, which is frequently, I get comments, a lot of positive comments, just because I talk about it a lot. So I think people are used to it. But there's always those people that are like, you're taking advantage of someone else, like our surrogate. And like that the comment I've gotten surprising amount of times, not a ton, but more than I would expect, is that I damaged my child because I ripped him from the
Oh,
womb of his real
Alex,
mother.
I was gonna
It's a
ask
question we
you
ask. Yes, it is.
because it's
Mhm.
the you know what? I'm not gonna put my opinion out there yet. I'm gonna let you put your opinion out there. What do you want?
So you
I'm
hear that
curious.
too. People say that
Oh,
too.
we hear that
all
all
the
the
time.
time.
All the
Yeah.
time.
It's the new thing rather than like, oh, you're buying and selling a baby. It's the new thing that's being said that
Yeah.
like, oh, this child is being ripped away from its birth mother.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
am no mother. Like,
Yeah.
not to that
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
how do
Yeah.
you feel with that comment? How did your child's 3, so
Yeah.
they don't really understand. He doesn't really understand per se, but
Yeah.
is he affected?
So
Again.
luckily I've only heard it online so far.
Okay. Okay.
Because like people don't really, I don't know, I haven't had really people more are either uncomfortable or curious when I talk about it in person.
Yeah.
And they usually don't go into details. Like people are a lot more comfortable saying horrible things online, right?
Mhm.
And I think they probably say it to you guys more because you're like they probably say it during the pregnancy leading up to the birth, right? So like that's not my experience because you couldn't tell that I was going through surrogacy just by looking at me.
Right.
Right. So it's just like a different timing probably of what things were. Because if people, I don't know, you can tell me after like how, or you can tell me in a minute how if that's right. But people will say it to me online. There's like always that one or two people in the comment section of videos or like reels or like whatever, a lot of posts that are saying like, well, you should be ashamed of yourself. Like you ripped your child away from like the womb of their real mother and
Oh
they're,
my God.
you know, they spent this time in this warm, safe place with the only person they ever knew. And then they went into a stranger's arms right after, like this type of thing. And I always go off on them
Good for you.
because I
Good.
just can't handle it. But also a lot of my other like friends and followers will be like, that's not right, you're crazy. You know,
Good.
because
Good.
they agree. But like I always say, like, you are so incredibly misinformed on what surrogacy is. And I
Good.
say, first of all, she would be the first person to tell you that she's not my kid's mom.
Mhm.
Like she carried him, she gave, you know, she gave us the gift of life by carrying him but she always said that she was taking care of him until he was healthy enough to come home with us, like big enough, strong enough.
Yeah.
And that the second he was born, he came to my arms because I am his mother and I was always his mother. And I said, surrogates will always be the first person to tell you they're not the mother. And intended parents will always be the first person to say the same thing.
Yeah.
And just that, like, to say that is not only misinformed, but it's so hurtful
Mhm.
because you're acting like this, like to say that my child is going to be damaged because of the way. And that's always what I say too. I'm like, he's not damaged. He was so loved when he got immediately surrounded by
Mhm.
not only my love, by also the person who carried him his love and her spouse and my like his dad. Like there was extra love in the room,
Yeah.
not a lack of love.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
majority of people just can't accept it. Like they they don't want to hear it. They just have their opinion and they will never learn. And to be honest, I usually just block them because I don't want them to be able to do it anymore. And
Yeah.
like either I talk to them about it and either they never respond again, like on their own, because they're like surprised that I aggressively responded back, and that other people did, or they get more aggressive with their comments. And then at that point, and sometimes, people lead into the human trafficking. Like they'll say that too. And I'm to that comment, I'm always like, look, there's a very clear answer here. That does exist, but that is not the definition of surrogacy.
Nope.
And you're using the wrong definition. Like, that's it. You just have the wrong definition. And like, here, let me explain to you what it is.
Yep.
And again, people don't usually always respond with like, oh, you're right. Thank you for teaching me that. They're usually like, no, you're wrong. You don't know what it is. I'm
Right.
like, yeah, I don't know what it is. Me, the one who went through it.
Right.
But I would say like, in general, because I think a lot, like if you're an intended parent or a surrogate and you're going and you want to share experiences like on social media and you get that type of backlash, just block them. Like they are only doing it for a reaction. They're just doing it for attention. Some things that kind of make me it's not funny, but it's like sometimes those comments, they get aggressive and it actually increases like the engagement on my posts because then so many people are like talking to them back.
Attacking back.
So I'm like, you're attacking something that you don't agree with, but you just got this post way more attention for it. So thank you. Thank you for your engagement.
So
like, you don't know how social media works. So thank you. But yeah, in general, I would say like, I don't take any of that stuff personally just because I know that's not right. And I'm not the type of person, like I'm not inherently a people pleaser. And I'm also not like someone who I think also for everything we've been through, I just don't take it personally when I see that. And because I am like very active and very open on social media, I would not be able to be like that on social media and still take it personally. Like I just, I can't to keep doing it. So I don't take it personally, but I know that doesn't mean that other people don't. And it's totally valid to get hurt by those types of comments. And I would say just block them, erase that comment. Like you just don't need to see that. You don't need that negativity. They're just doing it for attention. They have no idea what they're talking about and they're just wrong. Like they're wrong.
And honestly, 9 times out of 10, the people who are the ones like, what are they called? Text warriors or
the
word warriors, something like that. Those people who comment via the internet would never say it to your face like that.
Yeah,
like,
never. Yeah.
That's
why I've never heard it in person.
Right.
Do people say it to you guys in person?
I've never heard that in person. I've just seen it on social media,
comments.
which is the world now. But
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But just like comments too about like that's what like they feel bad for the baby because of that.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, they're like how like, and my mom's come back with it saying, because my mom's adopted, and so she's like, well, is that the same for like, are you saying the same for adoption then?
That is usually the comments that people make on mine as well, because like I have a lot of friends who adopted, and they're always like, people don't think of adoption as this way,
right?
And like, why is this different, and why are you thinking about it? And so it's very interesting, but
I don't know. Is there any advice that you would give to someone who says, Alex, I'm thinking surrogacy is the route we're going to take as intended parents?
Yeah, so I actually do get asked that a lot.
Yeah,
because I feel like because I talk about it really openly, I tend to be the only person that a lot of people know that is an intended parent. I feel like maybe not. I just get that a lot where I get a lot of messages or people that are like, I don't know any other intended parents, so could you help me? So that's actually part of the reason that I created my program, because like I definitely give people advice leading up to it, right? And so there's actually certain resources that I give people, like other people that I know that can help them in the beginning stages that have more of an expertise in that. But then I also then with mine, I just say like, whether you use my program or whether you find someone else, get support. Like that is probably the number one piece of advice I would give intended parents. Get support for during and get support for after. And obviously I would love if they join me and if I can help them personally, because it means a lot to me. But in general, get support, because you don't think you need it, or you don't think you deserve it as an intended parent, because there can be kind of this thought of, I was actually talking to another intended parent about this, like, there's kind of this misconception of like, well, I'm not the one that's pregnant anymore, and I just want to make sure that they're getting the support they need as the surrogate, so I don't really deserve the support anymore, like, or I'm not allowed to ask for help. I did not, like, I thought that I would be ungrateful if I asked for help for myself or if I asked for support. And so I think that's where, and like, that's interesting, like your face, it's like, it's not
The
obvious.
crossover.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Surrogates feel the same way.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And that's why I just wish we would all talk about this more, because
Yeah.
during the process, you really think you both feel so isolated and you don't think you feel the same way, but you do
Yes.
feel so
We
similarly.
do. Yeah.
Especially
And-
like you were saying earlier, when you have the middleman and things are
Yes.
getting, it's like telephone, and it's like,
Right.
no, just have direct communication. Like,
Yeah.
if you
So
cannot
that's
do it over text, do it
Right.
over the phone or in person,
Right.
because text gets misconstrued.
right. And that's where I would sometimes just pick up the phone and call her, because there was like a lack of tone and it was hard to
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
confusing things in the
Yeah.
text. But I think that that's where, yes, get support and try to have as open communication as possible between your surrogate or intended parents, like between each other directly, like what you just said, because I think that that is not always encouraged, especially if you go through an agency.
Yep.
And agencies are great, but I think that
They can be.
they don't, yeah.
Right.
But I think there are great agencies out there.
Yes,
And I
there
think
we
that's
go.
also another question to ask if you're an intended parent and you're going to be using, or surrogate actually, but if you're an intended parent and you're going to be using an agency, ask about the communication, because that is not a question I even considered asking. And then I was so frustrated with the communication style of the agency. And so I think communication and support are probably my two biggest pieces of advice. And then with that, I have the free guide that's for intended parents. And so it's kind of like a 9-step suggestion of just kind of going into parenthood. And it's like a pretty good size, like it's like 9 pages of just kind of ideas of, like, it's a solid guide. But it's to help intended parents. It's like 9 steps of intended parent support. And it basically walks intended parents through all of the topics that we would talk about in my program as well. And kind of, but I understand that not everyone wants to do a full program. So it's also the idea that like you can get this piece of information, this support to kind of jumpstart you. And then if you decide that you want to have that extra support, then we can talk and work together on more of a one-on-one basis, because it is like way more like
In depth.
when you work it's way more in depth, and it's way more, it's completely customized, and it's like directly whatever is bothering them, because like everybody's path to surrogacy is so unique. But yeah, I would say get support, because also I think this applies to surrogates as well. The support for after is not really thought about that much. And so I think, so I think that like, because I was actually talking to another surrogate recently, that's not mine, but she was saying that like the lack of support after is hard for surrogates in a way that I never really thought about before. And I'm sure you two can say this, like you feel like you give birth, and you can correct me if this is wrong, but like you give birth and then just like drop off like communication.
Bye-bye.
And like that's so hard, because like you're doing all of this and there's all these emotions involved. And like for the intended parents, but then it's like that's where another part of the support of, like for me supporting intended parents is just to kind of like guide them through that. Like that's a conversation that I would have with them before the baby's born about like, make sure you're talking to your surrogate about what it's going to look like right after she gives birth. Like, do you want to do like, because our hospital does the golden hour of like having the baby with the parents before they weigh, as long as everything's like okay. So that was like a conversation that we did have with Madison before, but because we proactively decided to have that conversation, not because it was encouraged. So I think like that's another thing. I want to have 1 or 2 conversations with intended parents before the baby's born, so that we can set up like how your support is going to go with with my program, but also like things to think about as you approach the birth, like conversations to have with your surrogate that maybe you didn't think about having, like what the birth, you can't plan the birth, but things like, for example, the golden hour, are you going to have separate rooms in the hospital? Or are you going to have to be in the same room?
Right.
If you're in separate rooms, are you going to immediately leave the room right after she gives birth? Are you going to hold the baby first? Are you going to let her hold the baby? Like just things like that seem really obvious. Like it's not obvious, but people just think they're going to figure it out. And it's highly emotional.
Yeah.
So
It
you
needs a
don't think about it.
conversation.
It needs a conversation.
It needs a plan. Yeah.
Yeah, it needs a plan.
Mhm.
And that's part you can plan for because as much as possible, right? As long as
Yeah.
everything goes well.
Right.
But it's like for us, and even things like our surrogate wanted to be induced, and that to me was her decision because it was her body giving birth. But I don't think every intended parent always is like that. So I think just having that conversation also before, like, how much are you going to respect her decisions
Yeah.
during the birth? And I highly recommend completely respecting her decisions because she's the one giving birth.
I like that
and
answer,
so,
Alex.
yeah, I mean, I always felt like it is my baby, but it's her body,
Mhm.
right? And so she's not the mom, but she is the one giving birth. So I felt like I was very clear with her, like, if you want to be induced and the doctor is fine with that, then you're being induced. If you want the epidural, get the epidural. Please get the epidural. I got the epidural. Please get the epidural.
Oh yeah.
But
Right.
like just certain things, like I would never tell her how to give birth. Like she
Right.
knows what she's doing. She can make that decision. And she actually like when she chose to be induced, our doctor chose an induction day and it was my birthday. And so he was born on my birthday. So we share a birthday.
way.
Cool.
So that
That's
was
cool.
very special because I felt like we had that extra connection.
That's very cool.
But that's where I think, yeah, the support, having those difficult conversations, because it seems kind of awkward at first to have them.
Yeah.
For example, like the golden hour after is very special. If I don't know if I don't think every hospital does that, but like they give us an hour with the baby. But we had a conversation between like me, my husband, Madison, her husband, just what we were going to do. And we all decided that it would feel disrespectful and way too rushed to leave the room immediately after the baby was born. And again, it's a totally personal thing. But I'm like, you literally just had him and you've been spent 9 months with him. I would like you at least to get to know him a little bit when he gets here. So we spent the whole hour with them. And I just thought it was really special because I got to do skin to skin. My husband got to do it. And then Madison got to hold him for a little while. And we just like all got to have, it was like, because the whole experience was our experience. It was,
Right.
and so it felt like it was coming to more of a complete ending for all of us by spending that first hour of his life together, because then she felt like she was kind of closing that chapter of her life, but without just being rushed into it, right?
Right.
And then like the hospital was great. They didn't rush us. They did have another room for us, which was important to all of us, just so because she also wanted to move on. And then at least the way it went for us, because she was able to give birth vaginally, she actually got to go home that night.
For
Yeah,
her.
like everything went. And so, because she gave birth like in the middle of the afternoon. And so by the nighttime, so like we spent, and it was probably more than an hour. We were just kind of like slowly spending the time together. And to be perfectly honest, like we're actually on another podcast together, but like we should go on your podcast together. But
You're
like
welcome to.
Yeah, no, but like we both said that it went perfectly. Like it just felt super special and it was calm. Like by the end, not the beginning was calm, but like when he was there, it felt calm and it felt right. And then she said that she wasn't sure if she wanted to be a surrogate again, just with how just because it was a lot of things.
Yeah.
But she said then after spending that time with us, with him when he was there, seeing us with him, and then she said watching us walk out of the room as a family, she said she immediately wanted to be a surrogate again. And she did end up doing another journey. And so it's just like you get this special, special bond, and you need to have those conversations though to know what it's going to be like. And for me, like that also included the day after, well, the night actually, I texted her to make sure she got home safe. And then I like was checking on her for the whole next like couple weeks to make sure she was healing properly. and felt good and felt okay, and making sure she felt emotionally okay. Cause I thought, I don't know how you feel right now, because we feel very different. And she was like, honestly, I feel good to get back to my normal life. It's a little weird, but like, it's kind of nice to just be with my girls and not be pregnant. Like, and it just, and then we kind of just fell into this, like, she moved, but like we still keep in touch very regularly. I send her updates and pictures of him because I always felt like that means a lot to her to see him growing up too. And she was actually like one of the first people we shared that I was pregnant with, when I was pregnant with my third son. And she had offered to do a sibling journey for us, like the second that he was born, like if we wanted it. But when yeah, but like when I found out I was pregnant with my third son, I texted her and she was like, I'm crying. This is so wonderful. You know, so it's just like, I feel like that relationship between intended parents and surrogates has this potential to be like one of the most special, incredibly close relationships of your life. But you need to foster it with support individually and communication together. So that's my big takeaways.
And you need to go in knowing that there's going to be a relationship there, that it's not going to be this transactional thing that some people have said it is. And be open to have the surrogates don't want to keep the baby. Let's just we don't. We have our own. We're good. Went into this to help others, like and that's a huge misconception that we want to keep it. So I think for intended parents, maybe to just understand that that's not what we want. That's we're trying to help you create your family or add to your family, and you're at a common goal. You're doing a common journey, and I just it really just isn't talked about enough. So kudos to you, really.
Thank you. Well, and I think that that's also really important to say, because I did not have that misconception, because I understood just that there's no way that the surrogates are going to do it to have their own baby. Like, I don't know. Like, I know. But it is extremely common for people to say that. And like, oh, weren't you afraid she was going to keep it? Like, no, not even a little bit. Not even a little bit. Okay. She's like, look, I don't want a newborn. Okay. Like, I'm going home to sleep in. Like, that's one of the first things she said. When I said like, oh, are you like, did you get home safe? She's like, I don't want to say this like the night that you have a newborn, but I'm pretty happy I don't have a newborn crying right now. She's like,
oh, 100%.
You know, good luck with your newborn, but like, I don't want that. My kids are happily asleep in their beds and they're older. Like, you know, so it's just like, that's where, I agree. Going into it with that understanding is really important.
Oh my gosh.
Well, thank
Alex,
you so much.
where can people find you, find your support, everything?
So you can find me, I'm on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, but mainly I'm on Instagram, Our Beautiful Surprise. My husband actually I had changed my handle when I was pregnant with my third one, because when we found out that we were having our third, he said, oh, he's our beautiful surprise. But then we said, actually, all of our kids are beautiful surprises because they just came in their own unique way. So that's So I've never changed it to my own name. Like, people are like, oh, I think you should have your name as your handle because it's hard to find you sometimes. But I'm like, no, I like my handle. You can find me on Instagram at Our Beautiful Surprise. And then also for my program, the easiest way to find out about that is just to download the guide that I have, because that'll give you like all of the information about what the program will entail. And it's specifically, I have one that is for more just any moms with infertility, but this is one for intended parents specifically, because it's just like a specific set of needs and all of that. So thank you guys so much. And I'll give you, it should be in the show notes, I think, right? For people to get that.
Yes, it will be.
That'll be an easy thing. Thank you guys so much. It was really nice to meet you and chat with you.
It was so nice to meet you.
Thanks for taking the time. I know that went a little long, but thank you.
No, I also talk a lot, so thank you very much.
So do we. You're good.
Very informative.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks. Yeah, you too. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Oh my gosh. Wow. Oh, I could just sit here for like another hour and just listen to her story. Amazing. But like, it's so amazing that like all three of her children got here in 3 different ways.
Exactly. Like I was blown away at the third one. I was like, wait, what? You carried him? Hold on.
Isn't that funny though? But that's how it works.
That's how it works.
That's how it always works.
Yep. When you're adopting, then you end up getting pregnant. Like, it's just so
always.
incredibly.
Well, not always, but it's you know,
A lot of the
it's
time.
common.
Yep,
Yeah.
a lot of the
Yeah.
time. Yeah,
Oh my
wealth of
gosh. Well,
information. Gosh.
yeah. Thank you so
And-
much for sharing, Alex. That was
And
amazing.
thanks for access to the guide. Like she's going to put a
Yeah.
guide in there for a download for any intended parents that would like to look at that. So very, very generous of you. So thank you very, very much.
Definitely take a look at that, everybody, because that is going to be very helpful.
Gosh, yep.
Oh my
Yep.
gosh. Well, if anybody else has any stories or questions they'd like to share and ask, please feel free to reach out to us on Instagram at Stop.Sit.Surrogate. And this has been another episode of Stop.Sit.Surrogate with Kennedy and Ellen.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Bye.